GM. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Another good day in the land of Bitcoin. Today, we're talking about Bitcoin interoperability, which, we've been working on for quite some time. Although in the land of meme coins, maybe not so popular. What's going on this morning, Chris? How you feeling?
Feeling good. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, excited about this one. We're seeing a ton of kind of new activity in the interoperability space. So excited for this one. How are you feeling, Jake? What's going on over there?
Feeling good, man. We're missing Adam on the live stream today. Adam,
where you at?
Did you lose power down there in Costa Rica or what?
No, I had apparently my landlord decided today was a good day to fumigate the house. So had to evacuate Petunia to the backyard, and I had to evacuate myself as well. So yeah, down at the local Starbucks, baby.
Damn,
Let's go.
Okay. That's some commitment down there in Costa Rica.
You're a beast.
Oh, man. Well, I'm excited for the conversation. I actually was not familiar with Omnity. Is it Omnity? Is that how you pronounce it?
You got it. Yeah, you got it.
I was actually not familiar with the protocol until yesterday in the comments, and looked through it, and you guys have built quite a crazy, call it turbo engine for the Bitcoin token boom. But, it's basically a Bitcoin interoperable hub. You have some AI components to it, so we're going to really dive into it today. But first and foremost, Sheldon, who's the founder, I'm assuming. Thanks for coming on the show, man. How have you been doing?
Hey, thanks, Jake. Transparently, I'm not a founder. I've been with our organization since the very early days, since the first TGE. Um, but yeah, I caught wind of this before it landed, before we were starting to do some light client work in a different non-Bitcoin blockchain years ago. And I said, this is really cool. This is work worth doing. You know, I hope someone values this as much as I do. And they said, well, we value you. You know, you can have some utility here. So I've been hanging out with the same company for about 4 years now. It's been pretty good.
Wow, damn, this protocol's been around for that long. Just goes to show how large this industry is nowadays, that, you know, you can really, you know, go under the radar of building something super cool. Let's hear a little bit about, you know, the backstory of it, because this is something new to me, although some of the technology I'm somewhat familiar with. How did you end up at Omnity Network?
So we've got like two main pivots. So a very early days, like 2020-ish, we were known as a research organization called CDOT. We were the first person to deploy Chainlink on Solana. We picked up some other, you know, gigs that were not too popular. And then 2021, we decided to launch a consumer chain business on Near Protocol. So that was cool and all, but our goal was to support other blockchain templates so that we could, you know, launch application-specific blockchains. We think Bitcoin is not the best thing to customize and fork over to app-specific purposes. So we've been working on that for a few years, and after a couple of years of doing that, we realized that there was a lot easier way to make light clients worthwhile, and it would also at the same time just be really rewarding to introduce that to Bitcoin and not have to be, you know, dependent on a separate economic system, separate VC, you know, all that kind of stuff. So in the later days of last year, we were already working on some components that were built on Dfinity. We started getting comfortable with their non-Bitcoin and Bitcoin infrastructure. We said, hey, this is pretty good. We can work with this. So ever since then, we've been building up this interoperability hub, and you know, there's a lot of distributed Bitcoin components for that. But ultimately, we don't have to have a single point of failure because we are, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants. So we do our own light client work, but we've also got some help in the bag. So that's pretty nice to have. But yeah, overall, the interoperability has been a pretty strong focus, and we just make it happen by bringing that infrastructure to one, you know, non-trust platform, i.e., a place where we can just emit receipts for every time something is executed.
So give me like the smooth brain, you know, for people who are listening. Just like, how is this for like normal users to use, or is this for like businesses or people building to use you as like an infrastructure layer? Give me the TLDR.
If you want to build an asset on Bitcoin and you want utility for it that's more than what Bitcoin can do in every 10-minute block, then we got you. That's the smoothest brain I can smooth it.
So I'm reading something, just some key figures from the website here that I have pulled up on the live stream. So it's about 500 grand in TVL, 24-hour tickets. Is a ticket like a cross-chain message? Is that, but that's native to Omnity Network?
It's like a record of attempting to create one. Even if something goes wrong, you still have confirmation that your transaction was submitted.
Okay, so yeah, so 15 tickets in the last 24 hours, 1,800 total. But here it says Omnity Network or Omnity interoperability supports the first fully on-chain interoperable omni-chain protocol operating without the need for any off-chain components such as relayers or indexers. You know, we've had this conversation a handful of times on this show about the fragmentation in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and with all these L2s and execution environments, and now they call them, you know, L1.5 and all these different layers, meta protocols, that there needs to be interoperability to connect all of these. And we're starting to see a lot of it proliferate, especially through the Dfinity ICP world, where it looks like you guys have built this entire tech stack on top of ICP. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I was trying to sort of like ramp up to, the light client work from the past has been just really, really useful because we got used to, like, you know, 10 or so different blockchains. So yeah, we are the light client bridge on ICP, but we couldn't do what we do for Bitcoin without their really heavy Bitcoin infrastructure. If you didn't know, they've got about $1 billion in Bitcoin locked up, and that's not our liquidity bridge, but it is a really good point of trust to say, hey, we're taking enterprise level concerns to secure a whole big bag of Bitcoin.
Right. And let's dive a little bit into the ICP infrastructure. I've seen a handful of different protocols pop up. I know there's like the TAP protocol is partnered with ICP to do smart contracts on Bitcoin. I know Bob Bodley with his NFT network has done something with bringing ordinals cross chain. What is it about this ICP framework? I think it's like something called like canisters and fusion or something of that nature that makes it so easy to build, cross chain solutions on Bitcoin.
So I might get a little tech tarded here. You can slow me down if it's
That's
too much.
fine. That's fine. I'm kind of
Go for
interested.
it.
So in a nutshell, we've all been looking for acceptable dilutions of trust, acceptable reductions of trust, some kind of however you want to mangle that model. There's always been some need to say, okay, Bitcoin can't read itself. We're not going to be able to produce blocks on blocks on blocks. What can we do to keep up the same trust level that a 100,000 node network has produced, and not degrade that to the point of, oh, hey, I'm making a roll up and you should just come to me and I'll roll up the transactions and don't worry about it. I'll be your black box. It's fine. I think that's the lane that ICP has settled into really well, because that canister concept, that sort of attempt to submit a transaction, that's how we got tickets. So that sort of prerequisite system saying, hey, you don't get to complete an execution on a synchronous backplane, on a just regular computer working to process that smart contract. You don't get to attempt that action without a record. So I think that's a different trust model from what we're used to, where you have to wait 7 seconds for a transaction to complete, or even 400 milliseconds for a transaction to complete if it completes. That's a different model than, hey, every time you attempt to execute something, you're going to get a cryptographic proof or a sort of mini result that says, hey, you attempted to do something. I'm sure that's why all these folks are popping up and seeing the value in DFinity's work. But shout out Bob Bodley and the rest of the team. We do chat a couple of those folks, and you'll see some more Bitcoin projects coming out there in the near future. But I'm sure that's the logic of why they see it being so valuable, is that there's dedicated components for Bitcoin, literally just supervising the mempool, running nodes, running indexers. All that stuff was already there in the Definity Bitcoin subnet. We did not have to pop that out. We were popping out light clients for other chains. That was the main utility for us. But of course, we already experienced what it's like to live on a non-Bitcoin blockchain, something a little bit more adventurous. And we knew we had to come home. So coming home to Bitcoin is just, hey, how can we make that trust exception acceptable, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it completely does. Take us through, your experience of, communicating with these different, Bitcoin layers or different type of Bitcoin protocols. As Emblem Vols, we work for and host this space. We're in the very same space as you, Bitcoin interoperability, and we've been taking, Bitcoin NFTs to Ethereum. But, in a world where everything is meme coins right now, and, no one really cares about interoperability, how do you guys go about, onboarding new users to a protocol, or to an omni-chain network where there's a current lack of interest?
So there's always the set a pile of money on fire and hope for the best. We try to avoid that as much as possible. Like that's definitely like I could say nice things about speculation and how the industry needs it and how innovation needs speculation, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is that businesses can only do that for so long. If you want to put down a loss leader as part of your business plan, that's cool, but you can't be expected to do that forever to grow. You might be able to do that in stints, but not permanently. So we're kind of shopping around for mutual benefit. There's a lot of dApps on these L2 networks or more experimental Bitcoin meta protocols, as you highlighted. There's a lot of these products and projects that are, looking for some traction. That traction isn't usually just straight up usage of the L1. It's usually something a little bit more esoteric. And we're kind of finding our lane in BRC20 assets coming up in the next month, and Rune assets that have been functional for about 6 months, been working now. And I think the reason we settled on that is because it's discrete data. It's relatively easy to manage in contrast with something like media. So we did run Ord on Dfinity, and that was one of the things that helped us manage runes. But we're also not trying to just copy blobs from Bitcoin and post them on Dfinity. We could do that, but there's not a direct value in that data, I think. So ultimately, to come back and not be on two tangents, we're trying to help folks find the sort of business use cases that make the most sense for them to grow relationships with different dApps, whether that's an L1 product on Bitcoin or an L2 product on some other chain, or even L3 projects that we're talking to. There's some level of, hey, I do want to relay back and forth because I want people to feel more trustworthy at the point of the L1, and I want people to feel more execution, more flexibility, more experimentation at the point of these meta protocols.
Yeah, you see here on the fungible token bridge, you can take different types of runes. You have $1 Billion Cat, Dog Go to the Moon, Epic, right? Some of the typical top ones. You could take it to BitLayer, Bob, ICP. I did see it on the homepage. There's ones like Merlin and Stacks and Solana. So really it's, to all taking quote unquote Bitcoin fungible tokens to these different quote unquote Bitcoin L2s, depending on how you see it. And then the approach is, finding the advanced decentralized applications on these networks who would like to integrate with the Omnity bridge. Do I have that right?
Yeah, roughly. It's not something that we're great at elevator pitching or 45 seconds ELI5 kind of things, because it's kind of use case specific. If you want to do something specialized, then hey, I can talk to you about that. But we spent a lot of time trying to reinvent crypto generics. I think we all know that that's not the strongest play in the world.
I mean, Adam, doesn't this sound like exactly what we're trying to do except with Bitcoin NFTs? Doesn't it sound like literally to a T the same thing?
Bro, it does. But to that point, it's like, well, first of all, like describing what you're doing, it's almost like it gets more complicated as we get more deep into it, right? And at the end of the day, for me, it's always about like, you have to have a use case. You have to have something like with us, it's very simple. We bring rare Pepes to Ethereum, like that base case where it's like a monkey can understand what's happening. I think is really, really important. Have you guys been able to find that yet? Or are you kind of leaning into something like have you been able to find something like that gives it the kind of dumbed down easy version of what you're doing?
So we're talking to a couple of different projects about that, and I can't alpha drop them for just ethics sake. But our way of going about that is not asking people to come to our UI. If someone is using our bridge and they don't know it, we win. That's the main thing. Am I going to get smooth brain level cooperation from someone who's going to think about the different security of different block space? Like, no, they don't. That's not why they're coming to us. But if someone sees the incentive that they can get somewhere else, or the utility they can get somewhere else, that doesn't necessarily have to be through our user interface. So that's what we're looking for, I think, is someone who doesn't know they're using it.
Yeah, so you're really looking to connect with teams and basically build those relationships and then provide the tech for them to actually create the use cases, right? And so you become like an invisible layer that nobody even knows they're using. Is that the general
without
idea?
Being an authoritative abstraction layer? Yeah, without saying, hey, we're the great one, you should trust us, everything's going to be fine. Like, no, you're locking up your own keys. We're counterparty to those private keys that you're using. But yeah, that's the goal for sure.
And how does the bridge operate? Is this like a multi-sig bridge, or is there something more advanced going on in terms of how the interoperability mechanism works?
So there's an HTLC on the Bitcoin L1 that has these primitives of, hey, can you unlock or not? And that primitive is based on the logic that we have on ICP. So basically it's saying, hey, you're locking up your own assets with your own keys. And then as long as you participate within the sort of instruction set that's given to you, then you can unlock that Bitcoin whenever you want, wherever you want. that's the shortest way I can describe it. But our docs will show you the contracts on each of these L2s, and that's basically what it is a deployer.
Interesting. On your website, you also have something about AI and AI agents. How is this wrapped into the entire protocol?
So right now we've got ORD running on ICP, and that's kind of a unique thing that we did, and that's great. I think Bob's also running one now as well. But in a nutshell, we hope to eventually pair it up so that you can have social data and on-chain data in the same place that you just talk to a black box about. Is that very open source of us? No, but we've open sourced a lot of our materials, and it's damn hard to make money off stuff you've already given away. So we're thinking that that's how we can eat our own lunch long term and say, hey, these might be our open source protocols. You can decide to trust us or not and review the public data here. But for a longer term sort of utility of the protocol, we want to be eating our own lunch via on-chain data and social data that we can parse and streamline. So right now the way it works is an account called Omnity Agent, I think, is being deprecated, and we're going to start adding it onto the main account, this one I'm talking on here. And you'll use grants.omnity.network to pay a small fee to pay people out in runes for just communicating on socials. So we're trying to get people to adopt a runes wallet that's non-custodial, so they can start from zero without needing a mnemonic and all those other UX things.
Interesting. Chris, what's your take on the network and all the discussion so far?
I definitely think it's pretty interesting. I kind of have a broader question, I guess, to start. Like, what do you think about ICP and how it operates? Kind of, I feel like we run into it pretty frequently, of it kind of being this under the surface, seems like behemoth without having too much kind of front facing activity to just a general like broad user base. What is kind of your interaction with ICP and kind of your take on just how it kind of seems to operate in the shadows, but seems to be playing a pretty pivotal role? What do you think about ICP generally?
So I think their ICO netting nothing was probably the biggest benefit they could have had. They've been in existence for a long time. They really, really, really hesitated on product because they knew that charging into the market in 2017 and 2018 was crazy. Honestly, it was incredibly difficult. Shout out to you guys for dealing with Omni and a whole bunch of other stuff. But there's a pretty significant motivation there to sort of focus on layer zero concepts without actually being a chain structure, and I appreciate that a lot. I think that's probably their biggest sort of success, is to say, hey, we want to deal with cryptographic primitives. We want to touch things that people are familiar with, like containers, but getting into, hey, this is the way that we make blocks, and this way is the best. I think they caught on pretty early that that's it's kind of a zero-sum game. Personally, watching Polkadot go through that was really difficult. Watching a community of people expecting saturation of demand and just not being able to get there, it's like, oh well, we could have just been more humble about this. So I think they were just really patient, and I don't think they were building in stealth really, but people had just written them off for a few years after the ICO as, oh crap, it was a scam, I'm not going to get anything out of this. But then they turned around and issued their asset, and some people got money off that. That's great. But I think a much larger volume of people were looking at the opportunity to say, hey, I can buy up orphan co-location infrastructure. I can buy up hardware that people don't want to use right now, and then I can turn around and sell it to a market and make money off that. So they found a good lane to exist in.
Yeah, I remember when ICP did the ICO back in 2017. I think it was one of the largest ICOs in the industry at the time.
Yep.
And kind of disappeared. And when ICP token came on, it was literally straight down, I think, for a long time. I do have here pulled up on the live stream I guess it's your guys' light paper, where it says it's the interoperability endgame for a modular blockchain world. So we'll dive into some more of the specifics here. I'm really interested because there's a handful of layers to this. It says Omnity is an omni-chain interoperability protocol built by the Octopus network on the ICP. internet computer specifically designed to fit into the modular blockchain landscape. So I'm familiar with, ICP and what a modular blockchain landscape is. What is the Octopus network?
So that's our namesake. When I initially joined the company, when we were doing that consumer chain business on Near, we had to kind of commit to that name because that's where we've got all these repositories stacked up as github.com/octopus-network. But yeah, that was the sort of initial tokenization of the work that we were doing. So before that, it was just, hey, give me some fiat, I'll do some work for you. And we're still kind of bound to that namesake. We did rebrand as Omnity, but we've got some assets that can't be repurposed. So this is our honest way of letting people find that history.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it right now. Looks like it had something to do with Near restaking at some point. It's interesting to see these protocols evolve. Emblem's gone through a handful of evolutions throughout the way, but also would consider it in the modular space. But Emblem's more of like a modular application more than like a modular blockchain. So
my question, Jake, could I cut in here?
Sure.
Building on Near, it's interesting. We've had a couple of people who built on other chains first and then kind of migrated during this cycle to Bitcoin. What was your thought? Did you just see the activity happening? We're like, wow, this is really a much larger opportunity than building on Near, or what was your feeling when you made that move?
We always expected this. We just didn't think it would happen this soon. Honestly, the majority of the team, I think more than 90% of us have been in crypto for 10 years plus. I mean, I started like 2012-ish. So I think that's the motivations to say like, hey, we know we can try this hot new thing. Next gen blockchain is great. Sharding state and a whole bunch of things at Near are very interesting, but it doesn't compare to the economic and security behemoth of Bitcoin block space. So we knew we'd be back at some point. That this was a little bit unplanned in the sense that we thought it would take another market cycle for the Web3 community to pivot and really look at Bitcoin as the ultimate source of trust. But hey, we're here now. So yeah, we had to come rush over in a hurry.
Yeah, completely understand. I know Near has some Bitcoin, I guess, interoperability focus as well, because that chain has moved into the chain abstraction world. But pulling away from the technicals, because we could probably debate on them for a while. Thinking about what the end state of this is, like what is like a perfect situation for the Omnity network and an interoperable Bitcoin ecosystem?
It's probably a wider acceptance of different formats of Bitcoin assets. Like right now, I'd love it if we had atomicals live on the bridge, but I think half the people who hear me say that don't know or care what that is. It's another esoteric asset type. That's the kind of thing that we want to support, to say, hey, it might be a little bit experimental to come up with your own asset template and get multiple people using it on the original L1. But if you're willing to do that and you actually get other people to adopt that standard on merit, then hey, we want to support that standard on merit. So we do some bridging of fungible Bitcoin, but in the short term, our specialization is certainly Bitcoin assets. So that's the wider world that we want to see is more people adopting and using Bitcoin assets, whether they sort of modulate to ERC 721s or 1155s. That's perfectly fine. We think that's still sort of the original usage of the Bitcoin asset. Easy example in how we did that in that past life as Octopus Network. We minted the entire token supply of OCT, that TGE. We minted that on Ethereum and then bridged over a big chunk of it to Near to use in smart contracts. And because we did that, we always had one leg into Ethereum, and that's helped us create CKOCT through a governance action at ICP. So way too many buzzwords, way too many acronyms. I do hear myself, but that logic of creating an asset on one chain that has higher security and then taking that asset somewhere else to do a little bit more, be a little bit more brave. I want to see more of that. I think that makes a lot of sense in Web3, crypto, blockchain, whatever you want to call it.
I mean, it's exactly the same thesis that we have here. We're just swapping it for NFTs, I think, for the use case, because it's a lot more complex when you're dealing with metadata and unique assets and this nature. But yeah, it is funny to hear the exact same conversation. Adam, you have a question? I see a speaker coming off.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, obviously, these are the conversations we have all day long, right? And it's, I mean, for me, it's kind of I consider myself an end user, right? You know, it's like we don't know what's going to work next. I mean, we're going to be doing a fungible bridge very shortly, you know, or bringing assets, fungible assets over and trying that out. What do you think are, you know, your gut says to you in the next, you know, 6 months to a year are going to be kind of some success stories or things that you're seeing, kind of not naming a specific project, but something that you see happening that you think might actually work for people or get some interest from people?
So it makes me sad to say it, but I think the majority of people in any market are still more accepting and more understanding of an authority than they are of, hi, I'm an open source product and you can see all the stuff that I'm doing. Here's my transparency. Like, I love that personally. I think a lot of us in this space really love that. But I think that the majority of people who are comfortable with a bank account, they still want to see an authority managing a supply. So I'm guessing you guys are familiar with something like ERC 1400, the sort of token that you can manage as an issuer. You can literally pull it off of somebody. You can issue an asset and then say, hey, you, wallet number 6, you're not allowed to have these tokens. They're going back to the treasury. Like, I don't like that personally. I think that's actually the opposite of the ethos of why we got into this stuff in the first place. But I think also that existing in Bitcoin is something that's going to make folks a lot more comfortable. And I'm not advocating for it by any means, but what makes that more obvious as a productive business solution or as a productive solution for, you know, a startup that's going to act as an authority is seeing all of these non-trustful, transparent projects trying to accomplish something, whether it's an NFT and a promise or just a fun meme game, or hey, here's our utility token and it also plays into this other system. You know, just seeing the sort of raw cypherpunkism that a lot of us want to see, it doesn't move the market because that's not a majority market opinion. Like, majority of folks do not want to be wholly responsible for losing their mnemonic and then losing their life savings. They want to pick up the phone and say, hey, Wells Fargo saved my ass. So I think that the more we see those kinds of projects in Bitcoin, they'll, you know, play that sort of acceptable trust threshold more effectively. That doesn't mean that those assets need to be perfectly untrustworthy or trustworthy. It means that someone who is an authority, who wants to act transparently and still be an authority, can do that on a public blockchain where we can see what's happening. Oh, I see you took the shares of Osama bin Laden. Okay. Oh, I see you took the shares of Sheldon because he's talking about politics you don't like. Hey, that's not cool. Let's have a court of public opinion about it. You know, I think we're going to get a lot closer to that more social level of this stuff when we can have explorers just as a reference, not as where we actually go to read up on what happened.
What kind of makes you think that it would be leaning in that direction of kind of being more retroactively controllable? Why do you think that would be kind of a big movement next?
I think the main reason I say that is watching Hyperledger kind of struggle as a product and watching people just go to Corda over and over again and pay for that as a solution and say, hey, look, we've got better trust between our corporations. Yay, we did the thing. We have triple accounting between 3 different corporate entities that already had liability agreements. I think that that's frustrating and almost pointless if you're doing that without public infrastructure, because you're still not accountable to the citizenry that you apply to in whatever jurisdiction that is. You're still just finding a more creative way to obfuscate your responsibility as a business. And because of that thesis from before about people trusting authorities, I think that seeing authorities operate more transparently, it doesn't mean that they become more trustworthy as authorities. It means that we can have more productive conversations about, oh, hey, I do see that this dark money moved from here to here. Not just that the hedge fund clapped me at the last second because I was on Robinhood trying to make a trade and then got.
Interesting.
I know that's a little bit off the cuff, but yeah.
I
Go ahead.
haven't heard the name Hyperledger in a long time. I think what we've learned over the past maybe 4 years in crypto since the NFT boom is that the majority of users are seeking permissionless over decentralization. They just want to be able to go in and out of things, you know, in a quick manner without having to get the permission of the owner. And, you know, even more so as a lot of these newer blockchains come up, most users are happy to sacrifice, you know, some sort of trustlessness as well, just to be able to optimize for trading or optimize for gaming or XYZ. So it's starting to mirror this. A lot of the consumer products are starting to mirror what you see in Web 2, with just traditional applications, which I think is fine. It just comes down to, you know, the education of having the users be aware, you know, that there are, you know, XYZ trust assumptions that are a component of this protocol. But, you know, ultimately, you know, as we go through this conversation, as we get deeper into these, you know, discussions, we have to pull back because they're like, oh, this is too technical. So a lot of times, as I think about, you know, notifying and, you know, spreading awareness, most people just unfortunately don't care.
Definitely. I think that the silver lining or the light at the end of the tunnel is that, you know, authorities being installed into all of this nonsense, it really does make people who are not authorities stand out more effectively. You know, I'll give a small shout out to Teke in the audience there, because he's working on a project that is specifically the opposite. He wants to, you know, manage this ecosystem of chess gaming and reputation, but not to be the authority over it. It makes the whole point of value to say, hey, I see this stuff happening in public. This is all transparent. You know, chess.com, if you come from an OFAC sanctioned country, tough shit. Who says you're going to keep your ranking? It can be canceled anytime. You can get pulled from the platform anytime. You know, good luck being a grandmaster through international politics. So I think there are people leaning into the, you know, the more transparent ethos of this, but that really draws the contrast with an authority who's pretending to be transparent, you know?
Yeah, I agree. We do have the Bitcoin ape on stage. How's it going? You have a question or comments for a conversation? Nope, just saying what's up. What's good, bro?
I was gonna say if Teke wants to come up on stage and describe what he's doing, that'd be really interesting. It's something actually I hadn't really thought about. I mean, we had, you know, obviously the whole idea of it's kind of hilarious, but you know, we're talking about Bitcoin and Bitcoin L2s and stuff like that, but still the biggest L2s are centralized exchanges, right? And I really vibe with what you're talking about right now, where most people, they're perfectly fine with kind of a centralized or somebody in kind of control of a project. But have you seen, I mean, other than, you know, Teke in the audience, but have you seen kind of success? Is there anything you've seen that's been done successfully in that way, where whatever, somebody sets up a community token or whatever, and they kind of have control over it? Like, have you seen one that I can like look at and research that actually was successful in pulling that off?
I mean, I think Dog is probably the most successful. You know, when it comes to dealing with centralized exchanges, liquidity, community, you know, venture, all these like hairball of things that mash together into a really difficult total thing to manage. I think they've done a great job, and because they've been paying those listing fees and honestly paying integration fees to get runes on exchanges that didn't have runes before, that gives me great hope that, you know, centralized exchanges would build up their Bitcoin infrastructure to support more of that. I think they are the de facto most successful runes project. So yeah, I got to give it to them.
No, I absolutely. I was actually asking more specifically about projects that use that token protocol that allowed them to basically, you know, pull back tokens and you know,
Oh, you mean an authoritative one? No, I can't think
yeah.
of an I can't think of an ERC 1400 offhand that is the one. But there are a lot of Australian and Dubai-based companies that are saying, hey, we can actually fit this into the existing legal framework, and we don't have to ask for, you know, special things with our government. because those jurisdictions did RFPs, they did this like really big, chunk of research before getting stuff into law. They made sure that a lot of that Ethereum-based stuff would be possible as long as you had, the authority to follow OFAC sanctions and all that other garbage.
Yeah, Adam, I do believe actually that Tap Protocol, who's been and Track, who's been on the show a bunch of times, they are building with Definity. Actually, I'm about to pull it up here on the live stream, and they actually have that protocol, which is actually called Authorities, and it gives these different meta protocols the authority to act on behalf of the users. I think it's more on a smart contract level than it is on a token ownership level. But there is some crossover here because they are building on Definity as well.
It's one
There's
of those
a property of it that's probably driving that you can pre-fund a contract under specific conditions so that folks can interact with it without gas. But yeah, I didn't mean to step on your toes, Adam. Go ahead.
No, it's one of those really interesting use cases which, your brain intuitively says, well, this is a really good idea. This is an idea that will have legs. But still, you want somebody to pull it off, right? And be the first one kind of through the door that does it successfully, right? But yeah, really interesting.
So let me ask you this then. As the Bitcoin ecosystem continues to evolve, we're getting more L2s of different varieties, right? We have Bitcoin L2s that are built on Clarity, like Stacks. We have Bitcoin L2s that are built on EVM, right? Like Merlin. You have Bitcoin L2s that are being built with the SVM, with the Solana engine. I have like Bitcoin, they call them layer 1.5s, which are things like Arc Network or Track and Tap. You now have side chains like Fractal. The industry becomes more fragmented, and there's now all kinds of different token standards across Bitcoin. Is that inherently good for Bitcoin? And do you think through interoperability, we can create a frictionless environment that solves for a lot of this fragmentation? Or do you think ultimately it's kind of like a whack-a-mole game?
I don't think it's whack-a-mole. I think there's I kind of describe this market behavior like an amoeba. You might have the leg that goes first, but then the body has to come with. That leg going first was BRC20s. Hey, we do want some fungible asset on Bitcoin. Yeah, we're going to enter this data. And, in the notes, Casey specifically comments how, this is incomplete and shouldn't be standardized for billion-dollar applications or something like that. He makes some comment like that. But on the whole, I think that making your own bespoke standard is different from, hey, here's a concept that I'm issuing as a standard and other people can participate with that or not. That's a really fine line. I do hear myself. But that property of saying, hey, we're going to try atomicals, hey, we're going to try these other, esoteric products, that's stamps, but things that are even less accepted than that, I think that's much less a whack-a-mole than it was to be the next sexiest EVM and to handle 1155s faster and more efficiently than your cousin. Not to down talk on you guys. I'm certainly not shit talking the two biggest standards, but people have ended up building on those EVM standards more functionality, modularity. Hey, I can give you this like ghost implementation of the asset and then revoke it back from you after you are finished borrowing it. Like all of those adventures with data standards, that's the thing that makes me feel like this is not whack-a-mole. If we were trying to capitalize on data standards more, then I'd be really concerned. I'd be looking at this like a fight that nobody could win. But because we're a little bit more centered on, hey, I do need this interoperability because I can issue you the greatest non-formatted NFT ever, but then you're not going to be able to take it to OpenSea. You're not going to be able to take it to standard markets. I'll have to have a discussion with Look On Chain or whoever the heck else to even get this data recognized as what I want it to present as. I think that congealing around some things like 721 and 1155, that's helped the conversation be a lot more productive. So it feels like whack-a-mole for sure. But if you look at market competition and how fast crypto moves, we're going to get through this faster than faster than internet protocols, faster than e-commerce. Before the end of the next market cycle, I would assume we've got a top 10 asset types, and then like a bottom 100 of more esoteric asset types.
Yeah, not non-formatted asset. That's an interesting way to phrase it, where you get something that's on Bitcoin and whichever type of meta protocol, and then you have to essentially format it and put it in an ERC 721 or an SPL 20 or XYZ token standard on whichever layer 2. So looking at then the the layer 2 landscape, we talked about this in the beginning. Your network is looking for advanced applications to plug these fungible tokens in. Emblem also does the same thing, where we look at these different L2s, looking at what are the advanced NFTFi applications, so people can take these quote unquote non-formatted assets and plug them into their ecosystems. How do you guys go about, I guess, evaluating these different L2s and understanding what's their culture, what's the use case, will it get adoption, is it technically feasible, and so on?
So I don't know if I'm showing my ass here, but I'll just say it straightforwardly. We do implementation testing on mainnet as the main check. If there's a EVM product that wants to compete with the existing EVM products that are already linked up to our bridge, generally we support that. We think that more competition is better. It might be a little more confusing initially, and in a smaller grouping that's difficult, but there's 9 L2s up right now. I think more than half of them have EVM functionality or just the basic ability to accept 721s and 1155s. So we're not trying to be the ultimate curator. We think that if we're too selective and too judgy about who's good and who's not, that it's detrimental to calling us a protocol. But we also think that the wider acceptance, the sort of utility and interoperability we want to bring, it's based on just, hey, can we do this? ICP's made a couple of upgrades in the past, honestly, not just year, but in the past couple of months. So we're expecting that we can get Ethereum L2s, ZK-based chains, and a lot more modern protocols to run either light clients or full nodes on ICP, and that'll be our path forward to get more of those chains. Really, when we're doing this, we're just being polite. We're saying, hey, are you willing to integrate with us? Are you willing to have us as an ecosystem partner? Obviously, I can run a node on a permissionless network without asking the person who publishes the network. I can just start running that. So we tend to not get too political about it, but we do just want to be truly omni and just try to accept everybody.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. So then, do you think approaching these L2s and adding in support for all of them, do you think that these different L2s, do you think there will be like a winner essentially that will consume the majority of the liquidity from these different meta protocols or fungible tokens that exist across Bitcoin?
So our prior existence comes from app chain theory, and that's part of how I kind of really just drank the Kool-Aid and got on board full send. Because to me, specialization is more effective, right? Like, what's the Bitcoin miner market dominated by right now? It's ASICs, it's not FPGAs. FPGAs are great. They're real flexible. For anybody who doesn't know, it's hardware that you can program to function in specific ways. But ASICs are application-specific integrated circuits. They're hardware that's designed specifically to mine Bitcoin as fast and efficient as possible. So I think that's the thesis that's going to really capture this market, is not, hey, I built the next best generic implementation of EVM. I made the fastest, I made the sexiest. Like, that's really tired. Yes, improvements can be made, and yes, there needs to be competition in a market, but DNS doesn't compete. IPv4 still doesn't compete with IPv6. The critical components that build up our internet today, they are the best shakeouts of an initial rush. They're not this infinite head over heels, hey, I can make software faster than you, therefore, I'm going to get the new market. So I'm probably on a little bit too hard of a tangent here, but because I think that application-specific blockchains are going to win out over time, the way that L2s and other sort of meta L1 or non just straight up L1 networks. The way that they're going to be successful is by focusing on their strengths. And it doesn't mean that they need to, raise up their weaknesses, because that's sort of generic common practice. Say, oh, hey, we have a problem with handling this asset type. Let's get that settled. We can start looking at everything that we don't succeed well in blockchains as problems. But I think that the way we become more productive as an industry and just succeed overall is ultimately maybe not specialization, but leaning towards it, being willing to say, hey, I'm the best environment for using 1155s and 721s for this purpose. That's my bag. That's my jam. That's the main thing I want to be known for. I think that's the way forward.
Yeah, I tend to agree as well. There's a popular Vitalik presentation talks about L2s, and he says that he thought that originally that the L2 framework would end up circling kind of one or two frameworks, and then that would be kind of the end state of it. But ultimately they ended up becoming hyper specialized, and heterogeneous, and it really surprised him. And so he's done a revision, and he basically calls L2 servers but better, right? And that's because they all specialize in a certain thing. There's only a handful of general purpose L2s, right? You have like on ETH, you have Arbitrum, Optimism, and Polygon, and then on Bitcoin, I guess you have Stacks. I guess if you even call that a general purpose one, everything else is becoming specialized. So really understanding where that is, right? It's almost like different cities that exist on a country of a blockchain. Just like in the real world, they all have their different specifics, and that's, I guess, what both of our protocols are looking for, is to figure out, what are the strengths of each network.
I'm going to steal that from you. The cities in a country of an L1. That's good imagery right there. Thanks for that.
It's a mental model that we use at Emblem, or at least that's the way that I approach this in the interoperability space. I mean, you have I kind of see it's like blockchains are countries, and you have applications, and L2s are the cities and states, and NFTs are the items that exist, and the fungible tokens are the the currencies that exist. And what we do between both of our protocols is we basically take the assets and we move them between the states and cities and countries. But you got to figure out what blockchain or what country is a mass exporter. I see that as like Bitcoin. Bitcoin's like everything, all the assets are exported from Bitcoin, where Ethereum is a mass importer. That's where all the synthetic assets are moved to Ethereum. And I think understanding this kind of framework really helps you understand the flow of the interoperability space. Although, there's maybe like 15 protocols that are kind of in this space altogether.
I'd agree with you, but I want to turn it on you for a second and ask you guys: do you have an opinion, or I guess I should say a formal or public stance, but just generally, do you guys have thoughts on EIP 4337? Because being at East Denver a couple of years ago, and kind of being excluded from the big kids table was really sad. It really wasn't expected.
Mm-hmm. So let me look this up again. Is this the one where you have the tokens that are account abstraction? Yeah.
So the key phrase here that I jam on as an old school Bitcoiner is off-chain mempool. That sounds very convenient for someone to just make a non-witnessed bundle of queued transactions, and then some nameless, faceless third party will handle those and decide if they move on to the L1. So that was the EIP that came out when they took away all the enterprise participants from East Denver. And that was kind of alarming to me, because I thought that, that relationship I was talking about earlier, the sort of authority that needs to mature and be transparent, but also, manage itself in the same way it's used to be in an authority. I thought we would see that break out reasonably over time. And then 2022 rolls around, or 2023 rolls around, and surprise, it's time to make the kids table, and then the adults will talk over here. That's how I say it.
I kind of see these things as what I've seen happen a lot on Ethereum is the changes that happen at the standard level, at the technical level, oftentimes are too late, and the battles have been going on the application layer for years at that point. And once the community or once users get settled in their ways within using an application in a certain way, even as clunky as it is, it's really tough to defeat that by, basically, cutting these applications at the knees and saying, hey, we're changing it at the technical level. I mean, this is basically what Solana basically did to Ethereum, is that Ethereum has been going through this, educational change, and it's a multi-year, upgrade, where Solana was just like, hey, I'm just going to go build this on the side while you guys battle it out. And users just flocked over there because the users didn't want to wait for this technical change of sharding and et cetera. It's the same thing I kind of seeing happening in the interoperability space, is that, although a lot of these things can change on the technical level, the users that exist in crypto have a short attention span, and they want to do things now, immediately. And so they're going to use whatever, they're going to use whatever tool there is to get to, or to use, they're going to use whatever tool they need to get whatever they need to be done. And after a certain point, there's that network effect that, has a kind of this runaway effect where it's adopted now and users aren't going to change, and they'll continue to use its clunkiness, even if there is a better solution that is added down the road.
Agree. I mean, I was really resistant to Solana initially. I made some money off of it, but the sort of make as many hashes as fast as you can and don't worry about binding them to a secure process or an economic process, that really concerned me, because the market loved it. It wasn't about block space security. It wasn't about the sovereignty of digital assets. It was about how fast and how sexy can I do this? And oh boy, you sure can. But hey, the market's going to get what it wants, and if the global market of ideas is increasingly disinterested with Bitcoin, eventually Bitcoin will change. But thank goodness Bitcoin is pretty stubborn, and I appreciate that a lot, because it makes these kinds of more fickle market opinions a little bit slower to break out and slower to control the market.
Yeah, when I look at the interoperability space, there's really kind of 3 or 4 different, I guess we call it methods that people use, right? There's like wrapped assets, which was kind of the first one to the scene, which is the central solution, right? It's like custody and mint the token on the other side. Then you had bridges pop up, and bridges were, that's the most common form right now. And there's generally 2 methods for this. It's like burn and mint or lock and mint, right? Lock in the smart contract. And then Emblem came to the scene in 2020, and they created something that's like vaulting and minting, right? It's like encrypted mint. You take the seed phrase to, a wallet, and you encrypt it on a chain, and now you basically trade those private keys on another chain. I'm seeing another one pop up for proof of work chains through OpCat, which is an opcode, which is kind of in its very, very early stages of testing it out. And then kind of on the foundational layer, you have cross-chain messaging protocols, which are like, layer 0 and wormhole. And it looks like ICP, and, you guys use subnets and canisters to do this in a different way as well. So you really have, a handful of methods that people are using. But even if something is better, people still tend to use bridges, for, they're using bridges for fungible tokens, and then they're using Emblem for NFTs, at least now. But it's still, a very, very small industry for what it will be.
Agree. I think that we've got a long road on the Bitcoin side on the more execution environment, and what we want to do, and how there's a lot of stuff that moves fast, like you said. But yeah, I'm perfectly willing to commit the rest of my life to this endeavor, because it's the only thing that makes me feel comfortable politically. So we don't have to discuss my politics, but just that's the truth. Is that that's how I came to Bitcoin, as in Miami, by the way. It's my hometown. They actually posted on the news on Halloween, when the white paper was announced. For whatever reason, someone thought that would be a good idea to inform the local citizenry, like, hey, this thing on the internet happened. It's like, what? And there was a pretty wide gap between that and me really accepting it as, oh, hey, this is not going to be suppressed to death and this is going to stick around. But I think that's ultimately still what we're dealing with today, is that, Bitcoin is really, really tough to kill. I sometimes call it a, 1,000-way Mexican standoff, because nobody wants the game to end. But on the other side of it, you've got this, desire to move fast and break things. And I do have respect and sympathy for that. We can do both at the same time. I think there's a worthwhile shout out that I could give to the drive chains folks for attempting to do this differently, because I think that there's a lack of kernel security or lack of appreciation for traditional security in blockchain in general, infrastructure side stuff. So I think we'll get closer to that eventually long term, but it's going to take a really long time for people to accept the idea that, hey, if I have another blockchain that has its own economic structure, I can bind that to Bitcoin as a trust layer and, as an independent economy. I think we'll get there maybe middle of the next market cycle. It's too soon for now.
Yeah, we were talking about this on a previous show, that the cross-chain kind of multi-chain thesis is probably still a full cycle away from being center stage. You see the early, inklings of it now. I mean, granted, we're having this conversation. This type of conversation did not exist last cycle. Just like kind of L2s were in its early stages last cycle with Polygon and stuff, I think. But now they're pretty much center stage. I think you see the same thing next cycle with bridges and interoperability protocols of all types. But one final point here, and then I'll pass it off to Adam if he has any questions, is how I see the interoperability space is it's actually very, very massive. I try to look and see, I try to compare things to the real world for it to make sense. And I've done research on the, global and domestic shipping industry, because that's kind of what I see the interoperability space as. And when you compare that, it's somewhere between 5 to 7.5% of the global GDP. So if you compare that to crypto and you say, okay, I'll just use 10% as, a number. If you think crypto is a $10 trillion asset class by the end of the cycle or next cycle, then, interoperability can potentially be, $1 trillion market capture by the end of it. So it's really, really interesting to think about. But it is very, very early. You just got to make sure that you survive until the next few cycles.
Absolutely. I mean, well said. Yeah, like there's a lot of cool concepts that have come and gone, and I think it was 1KX, the VC and sort of advisory group that did a good write up on this. But every bridge is some semblance of light clients, liquidity, and validators. So I think the more we get creative with that, the more we get patient with that, the more the market accepts what someone makes an attempt on with those different combinations of solutions. We'll get away from them as a trilemma and accept them more as a market force, because like you're saying, there's value to be had there, because why would I want Bitcoin to be a faster blockchain? I don't. I want Bitcoin to be the most secure chain. That's the greatest utility for it. So that's, when we talk about a source of truth or a, unstoppable system, making an infinite amount of them is irresponsible and almost impossible. But, making a, cohort of them that can talk to each other, that can, message pass effectively without degradation, without, non-verifiable interception, that's something really special. If I'm on an HTTPS website these days, I'm sort of told to be safe by Chrome, and oh, hey, yes, you're safe. The little lock symbol is here. Everything's fine. But I think any of us who know our OpenSSL or know anything worth our salt for TLS, we know it's not that simple. So I think that gap between what the market wants and what cypherpunks think the market should want, it'll make more sense as we clamp down in a digital world. But let me not ramble too much about it, because that's a whole other conversation.
Hey, Adam, any thoughts or questions on the conversation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you mentioned what'd you say, drive chains or whatever, we had Paul on, I don't know, a month and a half ago, and it's so interesting. I talked to him. I was like, because I mean, he's been on the drive chain trying to push this for years and years now, right? And I said to him, like, bro, do you ever think this is going to happen, right? And, sometimes, timing has to be right. It feels like this is maybe the second full cycle where we've got these L2s all happening and stuff. And, to your point, it's like, well, where is this all going and how's it all going to, I mean, none of us know exactly how it's all going to go. But I guess my question for you is, when you're deciding as a team, like where you're going to build or where you're going to put in effort, how do you make that call? Because this is something we struggle with too, because there are almost infinite opportunities, but it's like, okay, where are we going to deploy our resources to really go after? And I think we're kind of in the same bend, like, okay, we're leaning into Bitcoin, we see that, but what's your kind of thought process when you're deciding, well, this is the direction we're going to go?
So there's a thesis that we've had since the oldie Octopus Network days, and it's basically, we know that the longest chain has the dominance, but how much can we expect a chain to continue? So when we were on Near, we knew that if anything really went wrong with that protocol, we could fork it and run a small validator set if we had to. That's true of a lot of chains, but not all. With respect to Solana, without Metaplex, they're kind of in a pickle. Someone who forks that would have to also, have those NFT specific facilities. So when we look at Bitcoin, we look at the structure that we're sure is going to go on. But when we look at DFINITY's product and ICP's infrastructure, we're sure that that's not just going to continue, but that it could be infrastructure or designs that we make reutilize in the future. So the idea or the thesis behind it is like, hey, we never want to do double work no matter what. We know that blockchains are supposed to be sort of ethereally indefinite or permanent. So the only balance we can strike for that is making sure that if something really went wrong, that we could just collapse into an app chain and focus on what we do best. I think that's true of Emblem Vault and a lot of other great projects in the space.
Yep, couldn't agree anymore. Chris, any last takes or any thoughts? You're on mute. Chris, I think you're on mute, bro.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, one thing that kind of slid by me, I'm not sure if you mentioned how long you've been working on this or how big your team is, but maybe just some background info real quick. And then what was it like when, you seem to be building in this direction and then you see BRC20s kind of come along and you're like, oh, I think that might be what we've had in mind for a while. And then you see runes come on the scene. What was it like to kind of almost pivot your entire business in that kind of time frame?
So when we knew we wanted to handle Bitcoin assets, that was part of the I'm not sure about this. Like that was part of the discomfort, is watching BRC20s be so crude and be this weird kind of like TLD level rush to claim the name that is the thing. We knew that was really dicey and difficult. When we started seeing a little more hope on the horizon with runes, we said, okay, this is going to be acceptable to people who fell on the size of discrete data during the block wars in 2016. That made us a lot more comfortable. That made it feel like, hey, this is not going to be such a lost cause, that there will be a network of people accepting this asset standard, or at least considering it. That made things a lot easier to stomach, because oh boy, when I thought 5 lines of JS could make or break the business, I was pretty nervous. But we're a team that's not too dissimilar in design from DFINITY. DFINITY does have a large sort of external group of hubs, and those are not them as an organization. They're sort of incentivized to bring projects and to help people experience ICP and deal with the ecosystem and stuff like that. Their strategy was to keep a really big team. I think they have 200 cryptographers. We've got about 40 people on staff directly for DevSecOps development, review, integration. So we're pretty heavy on the back end. I think there's only about 15 or 20 of us that are kind of front end team. But I think that's a really underappreciated style of doing this. A lot of folks will put way too much pressure on one or two developers, and that's a recipe for disaster. I'm sorry. I've been a security engineer in enterprise companies. I've been the only network and security engineer for a publicly traded company. The difference in pressure is wild. The difference in the amount of things that just can't get done because I need to go to sleep is unreasonable. So I think that's the lesson that I could ask others to take on is like, hey, if you have one great developer who you want to be your senior and to do the main job, please support him. Don't pressure or them. Please support this person. Don't pressure this person. Understand that there's only so many hours in a day, and it does take time to manage somebody else's work and QA somebody else's work and, straighten up mistakes. So I think the more people are sort of patient with the human needs of software development and testing and validation, that makes it easier to say, okay, yes, I need a marketing team. Yes, I need BD, but I need incentives for external parties more than I need a front of house, bright and shiny presenter. I need folks to get the job done and some people to talk about it.
I love it. You guys have a pretty big operation over there. That's impressive. One thing you did mention on about the block size wars. What is kind of your general, with hindsight, opinion of the block size wars? It seemed that the small blockers won that first battle initially, and it really caused a huge uproar across the entire industry. But now it seems, at least from our perspective or my perspective, that the big blockers may have been more right than wrong, or that the industry is kind of pushing towards that aspect of the initial war. What is your general thoughts on the block size war and how it turned out?
I'll give you a more official opinion and a more casual one. In a more casual one, I was trying to encourage folks to accept a sort of weighted parabola of why you should allow a 10 megabyte block if someone's willing to pay enough for that block. But outside of my sort of personal esoteric hopes for a dynamic block size within a range, we understood that smaller block sizes would keep Bitcoin infrastructure cheaper to maintain, easier to adopt, easier to recognize by third parties. But it's still not a flat 1 megabyte. It's still not flat 2 or 4. So there already was some flexibility in there. As a company, we know that Bitcoin is going to change in the future. We expect there not to be a 10 megabyte block size in the next few years. That would certainly be surprising. But if that happens because there is just enough hash power to juggle it and there's enough demand to maintain that, then we think that there will still be a really significant need. And if anything, there'll be a wider a lane. There might be higher or lower demand, but the capacity will change. And that means that there's a greater valuation for Bitcoin as a source of truth, because you might be only able to cram so many bytes into a 10-minute block, but what actions can you correlate to the data that you post in that block? Folks like Syscoin and others will tell you, like, hey, there's a lot you can put into a relatively small space when you're willing to do some ZK circuitry and cryptographic backflips of trust. But it's not that we need to do more of those things. It's that we always needed the space to use the Bitcoin blocks fully and completely without letting the market starve. So I think that we're going to get to a larger block size in the future, but I think there's a good chance that won't happen in the next cycle or two, because so many people will be excited by the price action that intense demand and lessened supply will deliver.
Awesome.
If you've only got so much block space, then hey, it's going to go up in price.
Yes, sir. That's what we hope so, right? That's why we're here. Sheldon, I really appreciate you for joining the call. I think this is very interesting. It's not often we get to have a Bitcoin interoperability conversation. So, very enlightening, and I hope we can stay in touch as we, kind of navigate this very large blue ocean with not many people inside of it yet.
We'd be happy to stay in touch with you guys. Like I mentioned before, we're all Bitcoiners from back in the day. So, we've seen the Emblem Vault do great stuff on Principle, and I caught up with you guys a little bit on chain a few minutes ago, and it's good to see some rare Pepe still circling around. People forget what the original purpose of Pepe was, but I know Emblem Vault has not forgotten.
Oh, no, we haven't. Building out MemeFi, my friends. Building out MemeFi. Appreciate it, dude. Awesome conversation. For those that are new to the show, Adam, myself, and Chris, we work at Emblem Vault, leading cross-chain NFT protocol. Tomorrow, we're going to be hosting NFTFi, who is building a cool trading platform for ordinals and NFTs across all blockchains. We host a show Tuesday through Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. If you enjoyed the show or if you're interested in Bitcoin interoperability, please follow the Emblem account and also follow the Omnity account as well, so you can stay in tune and see all of the cool cross-chain stuff that's coming to the future. Until then, everybody, will be back tomorrow morning. Stay safe out there. Enjoy your Wednesday and have a good one.